Alright, so this is another internal Pop the Hood video. We're going to look at some of the changes that have been made since the last one of these I did on this project. First and foremost, I've brought in a new tool called DoTween to expedite some of the more tedious processes in programming and allow me to focus on things that require a little bit more time to invest in and complete. One of the first instances where I've used this is to rip out the animator from the fade canvas. Previously, the animator used this sort of convoluted system where, in order to make sure it didn't load a level before it was done fading, you would go into the pause menu and raise a Unity event that would have two separate instructions. One to cache an instruction to happen after the fade canvas was done fading, and another to actually start the fade. I have changed this with the help of DoTween so that the fade actually happens now in code as opposed to using the animator, and condense it to where you no longer need to cache the instruction. You simply pass in you simply make the right function call. If you want to load a level, there's a call for that. If you want to quit, there's a separate call for that. And it will now only execute those calls when the tween is actually complete, i.e. when the fade is complete. So you no longer have to cache that instruction. You can now pass the parameter as 1, which was not currently possible because of the way Unity's animator system, which was not previously possible because of the way Unity's animator worked. I also have used DoTween to expedite the creation of moving platforms in the game, and previously that would have been a little bit of a tedious coroutine work to alert between these 2 points, but DoTween makes it much easier to execute that functionality with very little coding time to get it up and running. So it saved me quite a lot of time in that area. I've also used it to create a little shake effect for the foliage when you walk over it, to simulate games like Ori and the Blind Forest, which I quite like because it's sort of like a canvas or a painting brought to life with how much movement's going on in the background. And I've tried to capture some of that by making the world a little bit more interactable so it feels alive. I also use it in the same vein as the fade canvas for the tutorial panel, which has its alpha fade in and out when you go onto triggers, which I'll talk about soon. Another tool that I've brought in to expedite some of the programming is serialized dictionaries, which allow me to have things that are a little bit more extensible and just more pleasant to look at. One of the main implementations of this is in the Scene Music Manager, which now creates more meaningful links between the scenes and their corresponding tracks. Previously, I had a array that was hard linked to the scene's build order for what tracks it had to play. I did not like this. It was hard linked again to build order. It was just a bit of a mess and not very expressive of the actual connections. Originally, I tried to link this by the actual assets themselves so it would be rename proof, but that's something that I've put off to have further down the pipeline because it's a little bit more challenging than I would like. So for right now, we're linking them just by strings, but I do look forward in the future to making that rename safe. Down on the pause menu, I've changed the menu audio script. Previously, this would have a switch statement that would go through and switch which sound to play for clicking on the button based on the string that was passed in. But it wasn't very extensible, which I did not like, so it now uses a serialized dictionary, and it has linked between the actual strings that get passed in from the buttons themselves and the sound that it should play. And adding new button sounds requires no code. It's just a matter of adding a new entry into the serialized dictionary and passing in the corresponding string name as shown, I think, here. It just has that call to the menu play audio sound, passing in the button name. So moving on, we also use it most prominently in the tutorial system over here. The tutorial blurbs library is a link between a cue string and the actual string that should be displayed for that trigger. And it's best demonstrated by making a new one, because this requires no code. I just duplicate an existing trigger. I could name this something like glide, pass it in the queue name of glide, and then going back over to the exposition canvas, we can add a new entry for glide and change the tutorial string that should be displayed to something like hold Q while airborne to glide. And we can see this in action. I should probably fix the jump delay a little bit. Right there, works without any new code. Very simple to expand, something that I'm quite proud of. So that's all the use of serialized dictionaries in the project. Moving on, as you've already seen over here, another big change that in part allows this system to work is the new scriptable object-based events, which work like signals from Zenject, except they're designer authourable. This, of course, is again taken straight from the Unite 2017 talk on scriptable object-based architecture. And while it certainly has some pitfalls, largely because of Unity's problems with serializing generics, forcing me to create new event types for every kind of parameter I want to pass in, which kind of sucks, they still allow me to add entirely new functionality without code, as in the example of the tutorial system, but also in the example of the glide sprite, which previously was hard linked to the player locomotion's logic code, and it would run the actual enabling of the sprite and disabling of the sprite there. I have loosened that coupling with the creation of these events, and that code is now done entirely through a Unity event, and the entire air dash script also was removed and replaced simply by this event listener that executes a Unity event that simply calls into the scale coroutine. So I've been able to remove some of the code just by using the new scriptable object-based event architecture. It is pushed a little bit to the extreme in the case of player audio, with how many events player audio has to listen to. It's quite a lot. So I've been thinking of creating a special mono behavior that allows a game object to subscribe to multiple events and set Unity event responses for each one, so that I don't have to have this long list that is difficult to maintain. But at current, it's only existing in the player audio, so I'm not terribly concerned for that, but it's something that I am thinking of fixing. Moving forward, there's been a small change to the Surface Manager over here. It now links by the actual rule tiles themselves, as opposed to the names, which makes them, of course, rename safe, which is a feature that I discussed implementing in the previous video. I've finally done that, so that's just a pretty simple change. Over here, I've created the new VFX Manager system in vein of the same VFX Manager created for the 2D game kit of Unity's creation. Currently, this is a pretty new system, so its functionality is very limited, and it's only used for creating the entity death VFX particle systems, or animations. But in the future, I hope to link up these ground land VFX systems and set it up so that it can play the correct ground land VFX based on the surface that you're landing on by linking into the Surface Manager. But again, this is a pretty new system, and I only have a ground land VFX for the actual dirt, so I haven't had time necessarily to work on the wood land VFX, which would then drive the creation of the override system. Moving on to the dynamic music, that's actually pretty simple. I use a separate trigger collider on the enemies, and upon entering it, it will know to make the switch to the new combat music, and basically it does some logic behind the scenes to track so long as you're in at least one of these enemy trigger colliders to keep playing the combat music, but as soon as you exit one, or the enemy that you were previously in the trigger collider of dies, it will then smart switch back to the actual music that should be played for that scene. So that's how that works. And the only other thing I wanted to show was the checkpoints and tutorials now have these special gizmos that draw, so they're a bit easier to see where they are in the scene, which has helped me to get rid of these level design annotations entirely, though I still use them a little bit. And one other small change, which took just one function call, was setting it up so that the player will now start at whatever checkpoint I set in here, which is currently set to the checkpoint over here, so I could test the moving platforms. But if I set it back to the level start, then it should go back to the level start as expected, which is just a nice quality of life for testing things a little bit more rapidly in a level that's a bit bigger like this one. And that's it for all the changes I've made, and hopefully I'll continue working on this project and adding new features as I need them, and I will create a new Pop the Hood video when I think the time is right. So that's it for now. Thank you for watching.